There are few things which give me much pleasure as spending an afternoon hedgelaying on my farm at Highgrove. It is a skill which I have only recently begun to learn, but it is one from which I derive the utmost satisfaction. There was a time, of course, when the countryside was the home of many rural crafts, wheelwrights, hurdle makers, blacksmiths and charcoal burners, to name but a few. In the last 50 years, many of these have disappeared, but now slowly they are beginning to be recognized not just as part of our heritage, but more importantly, as part of the way in which we can return to a sustainable and vibrant countryside. Hedgelaying is foremost amongst the skills which are making a return to our rural life. And I do hope that this video will encourage more people to learn the craft and understand the important contribution it makes to the conservation of our hedgerows and wildlife.
In few parts of the world has the landscape been so greatly influenced by man as it has been in Great Britain. Over thousands of years, man has adapted and managed the countryside around him for his own gain, and until recently has done so in such a way that nature adapted as well. From the sheep walks of the chalk downland to the grandeur of open moorland, from the glades of coppice woodland to ancient wildflower meadows with their ridge and furrow patterns, the results of man's endeavour are all around us. Yet ask a visitor to these shores what it is they notice most about our countryside, and the answer could well be a more modest, more overlooked man-made feature: our hedgerows. Hundreds of thousands of miles of hedgerow crisscross the countryside, forming a giant patchwork quilt. Some ancient and wild, others more recent and uniform. But why are they there? And why should they be preserved, along with the skills of managing them? Let's start our journey in the past by briefly looking at the history of hedgerows. It is not difficult to imagine ancient man protecting his animals within crudely made stockades using dead wood, and soon after learning to plant hedges as field systems started to develop. Hedges also resulted as woodland was cleared. As the trees were removed to create fields, the scrubby woodland edge was left to form a barrier or mark ownership, and these hedgerows can still be spotted as they retain typical woodland flora. By medieval times, some areas of Britain had as many hedgerows as there are now. The Great Enclosure Acts were a time of more hedge planting than ever before. Between 1750 and 1850, over 200,000 miles of hedge were planted. As agricultural practice changed from open field systems to rotational mixed farming, hedgerows, especially Victorian plantings, became predominantly hawthorn in order to be stock-proof. But if one of the main purposes of a hedge was to keep livestock in or out of a field, then how did the landowner manage a hedgerow in order to keep it stock-proof before the advent of wire? Well, he employed the skills of a craftsman. In this case, the skills of a hedge layer. Hedge laying involves partially cutting and thinning down through the base of each stem in the hedgerow and laying it over at an angle. The remaining stump, or heel as it is known, is then taken off to encourage new growth from as low to the ground as possible. This whole process is called pleaching. Just enough wood is left to keep the stem or pleacher strong, and to include the cambium layer just under the bark, which carries sap up into the branches. The roots continue to feed the old plant, and also new growth is stimulated from every cut surface. Stock cannot get through the thick, impenetrable hedge when it is completed, and a well-laid hedge is the pride of a craftsman, and a sight to be admired. Many different styles of hedge laying have evolved around the country. Indeed, nearly 30 can be described, though far less are now practiced. Each style developed out of practical necessity, a localized farming practice, or availability of material. In this video, we will look at 8 of the main styles found today. Let us first of all look at the tools of the trade with Jeff Key of Derbyshire.
We're here today to try and explain a little bit about the Derbyshire style of hedge laying and the tools that we use in Derbyshire. Mostly we use a long-handled Yorkshire billook, like this, made by different people, the different makes. The most important thing about them is sharpness and nice and thin. So you don't have any shoulder to sharpen off, and then they slice through the wood a lot easier. You can use this as a small billook or two-handled as an axe for cutting up the bottom stools or thicker pieces of wood. Some people in Derbyshire like what we call a Warwickshire billook. Very, very useful. You can do 2 jobs with it because you've got the hook for small pieces, you've got the straight for cutting in, for laying, but there again, the thinner the blade, the easier they are to sharpen and keep sharpened, and they slice through the wood a lot easier. Wonderful tools. And if you can find them with a name like that, which is called hedgehog, you know that it's good steel. Wonderful steel from the hedgehog. Another variety is the single-sided one, universal all over England and Wales. These are used. There again, thin along there, so they sharpen easier. Much easier to sharpen, and they're nice and thin. Even down to the south of England, boys like these very much, because they very often have a leather sheet on the back with a hook, and they can hook this round the back of them, and it's there whenever they want to keep it. It's there because it's top heavy and it hangs down, but it's a very useful hook to use when they get them on the belt, and they know it's there when they want it. When you've got to cut through bigger stuff, to lay in the first place, to cut and lay, we like an axe. There again, a good axe should be nice and thin, well sharpened back with hardly any shoulder, so that they slice through the wood a lot easier than having to jar. If you want a wedge, you use something else. That's a 4 pound, very useful, also for cutting up the stools when it's clear, nice and thin and even all the way through, and you can slice into the wood and also prise them open and slice them and lay them a lot easier on the bigger stuff. If you've got a very big hedge and you've got some stuff and you're nice and fit, you get a 7 pound. And there again, you look at the maker's name, and if you can find the maker's name on them, hedgehog again, absolutely wonderful steel. They stop sharp a lot longer, the better qualities of the steel. Big axe, bigger work. Wonderful tool though, because it'll do a lot of work if you can find the strength to swing it. Very, very useful tool. To clean out before you even start laying, you've got to clear your briars out and rubbish out of the bottom of the hedge. So you want a long handled splasher so you can work away from it. These are splashers, billooks, brushing hooks, whichever area you've come from, they're called different names. And also you can reach high up into the hedge and cut off branches that you want to get rid of first. This one, quite a long point. Originally when we had to trim hedges by hand, this was more of a Staffordshire, because Staffordshire always trimmed their hedges up and flat across the top and made a square hedge. The hook part of it would rake your thorns off. That's when we had to do hedges by hands years ago. We don't do things like that now, it's all done by a flail. In Derbyshire we use one with not quite so big a point, nice and sharp, nice and thin, because we used to make around a hedge and we'd do probably 3 cuts, and the hedge is always finished up round, so you didn't have to rake so many thorns off the top because half of them were coming off anyway. But that's a good Derbyshire, made by Harrison, another good name that's long gone. Unfortunately, a lot of these names of makers have gone. Even Elwell, small axes, Elwell, the name is gone. Been taken over by bigger firms, so now you're lucky if you can find a good quality steel make. You've got to hunt around and try every one. Most important in hedge laying is a very good strong pair of mittens or good gloves. A lot of people can get away with gloves nowadays. I've always worn mittens and I find them better because I can just get hold of thorns any type and I know the thorns are not going to go through them. To drive these wooden stakes in that we have in Derbyshire, the bigger thicker wooden stakes, we need a maul. Wooden maul made out of apple. I found apple is a far better wood than any for making a maul head. Any shaft in it will do anything you can do. Drill a hole in it and put any sort of shaft in it will manage. You don't have to be dead straight or machined, but that is 4 years old and I've been using that every day of all winter. I like the square shape of it. You can hit the top of the stake and it doesn't split the wood on the top of the stake. A round 7-pound steel sledge, you haven't got the big area to it, and it does tend to split them. And if it does miss and come through, you'll break your leg. So I've always found a wooden maul, use it one-handed, but you can use that all day and it does its job, and you're not, they call them a maul, but it doesn't maul you.
A good craftsman places great value on the tools he uses, and hedge layers are no different. Today, good quality tools can be hard to find, though in days gone by, edge tool manufacturers existed throughout the country. Old tools, marked with such names as Elwell, Biped or Hedgehog, are now sought after in junk shops and auction rooms alike. One of the few, if not the only, remaining edge tool manufacturer in the country is Morris & Sons of Dunsford on the edge of Dartmoor. Now supplying craftsmen all over the country, they carry on a tradition based on individuality and a randomly different feel for each of their finely made tools. No two bill hooks ever have the same weight or balance, and so it should be. There has never been room for conformity in the countryside. An important part of tool maintenance is sharpening. There are many types of stone available, each providing a different coarseness for progressively finer sharpening. New on the scene are these tools, which are covered with rough diamond grit. They sharpen quickly and are easily carried in a pocket.
And I find the best way to sharpen is keep a glove on this hand, because at least if you do happen to get close to the edge, at least you are partially covered. What we'll try and do is sharpen nicely and go away in the long, clean strokes. Because bearing in mind, the sharp tools are safe tools, and also sharp tools save you a lot of work. So let's have our kit nice and sharp. Having sharpened one side, have a look at it. And if you do look at your tools and you see some little white marks down the blade, that is where the tool is blunt. So if we can get those little white marks out, we'll find we've got a better axe or bill hook to work with. One of the things we mustn't do is sharpen towards the blade. This will end up cutting our fingers. So turn your axe round. Here we've got a bill hook which has got two sides on it. When you're sharpening, be very careful, its fingers against that blade there. So try and just lay it against something like that and sharpen it away from yourself like that. Right, having got it nice and sharp, ready for use tomorrow, what I find one of the best things to do is to use an old sack. This will keep the edge nice and sharp and also stops you damaging anything else.
Few places in the country are hedgerows as important in the landscape as they are here in Devon. In Devon, when you talk of the hedge, you talk about the whole bank and the species growing on top of it. In many parts of Devon, hedgelaying is actually called hedge steeping, and we're here today near Honiton with members of the Blackdown Hills Association. So George, this one has been steep before. Could you just explain what's going on here?
Well, this was a maple. It's very, very difficult one to steep, tends to split. But if you notice, it's not down tight to the hedge, so lambs would go up underneath there. It's not growing here anywhere. That should have been put down lower, bank dug up, and then this would have rooted down wherever the dirt would have touched it. It would have rooted again and made that a firmer one. At the moment, all it's held is the end that it was laid.
So every time you're actually steeping a hedge and putting stuff close to the bank and then building up the dirt, stuff is rooting,
Yeah.
filling the hedge up a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
In the Devon style, the hedge is steeped over very flat along both edges or combs of the bank. Stock are unable to climb the bank with the tight hedge on top. The steeped hedge is held down tightly to the bank by crooks, which are driven into the bank like pegs.
No. I'm going to chop that one off, all right?
That's the place I'm George.
They'll put the brambles in, please. I'll keep these.
Roger, what are they putting in there?
A bond, we call it a bond, and it saves using so many crooks, and it covers a wider area.
So that's going to go into the bottom of this side and go over the top.
Over the top and under the crook, I would imagine, that they've put in.
Okay. Is that slightly owing towards something like a Dorset style as well?
It is a bit,
Yeah.
yeah,
And you call that a bond?
a bond. Well, this hedge, you know, there's very few crooks in this hedge, is
Yes.
there? But there's a lot of bonds, so we, you know, using the material from the hedge.
Now you've got a few unusual names for different species of wood, haven't you?
Yeah.
Give us an example.
Well, withy, scrub oak, blackthorn, you can do anything with, you know. We call that the fair ladies.
Right.
Maple, whitethorn,
A whitethorn, you mean hawthorn?
or hawthorn, yeah. They're very temperamental. We call them the wicked lady.
Is this referring to the fairer sex in some way?
I wouldn't like to comment on that.
Some Devon banks are very wide, and one can only marvel at the sheer amount of effort needed to build them by hand. The disadvantage of them is that they can be eroded by the weather or livestock, and steeping the hedge provides an opportunity to repair them.
Morning, Roger.
Morning, sir.
How you getting on?
Well, not so bad.
You just about finished this one, haven't you?
Yes, I have completed this one now, more or less.
Brilliant.
Bar digging it up.
We're guests on your land today. How many acres have you got down here, Roger?
Well, roughly 300 acres I'm farming here.
So you must have laid quite a few of the hedges on your farm.
On Black Ace Farm alone, I've laid all but one. And I started with my father when I was about 12 or 13 years of age.
You've been saving that one.
Well, he'll get done. He's let up to be done. So,
Brilliant. Now, this is ready now, isn't it? You've
Yeah.
just about finished this one. What's the next step? What are you going to do with this bank in front here?
well, I'm going to dig it up and put it into the middle now.
Okay. Because this is just eroded
Well,
down.
it's just eroded and sheep rubbing it out and rabbits and one thing and the other, you know.
So I suppose if it's in this state, stock can actually get up onto
And they can
it.
get up onto it,
You know?
that's right.
Okay. Now I notice in the middle, you've laid everything both sides to make the combs.
Combs, yeah.
You've left the stems in the middle high. Why is that?
Well, so that the soil will go down round them and there'll be some growth off those stools in the middle of
So
the
they'll
hedge.
be at ground level.
Yeah, they'll be roughly ground level, yeah.
In the old days, these banks would have been taken up by hand, wouldn't they?
Oh, yes, yes.
With your Devon shovel.
The Devon shovel and the stone pick, digger or pickaxe, whatever, yeah.
And then they would have been turfed up, would they?
Where there's gaps, there would have been turfing up, yeah.
Yeah.
This is the sort of traditional way of recreating a Devon hedge. The various stages through here. The first stage is to find a good solid platform. So we dig out a level platform like this that we've put through. The only two tools you need are a Devon shovel, which always has a curved handle, because that way you don't have to bend your back when you're working, and a digger. So we use a digger, bang this down and consolidate everything, so you've got a firm base for your turf. Then take the turf from the base of the hedge, just like digging a brick. Pop that in and consolidate. Then as you're doing it, you always mix down the soil from the back of the hedge. If you're doing your infill and you leave that soil as it is, it can form a sort of a plane for water to run through, and then the whole lot can slump out. So you always mix in behind. And as you're doing it, you always dig out from the bottom, and once that's all in, take your digger again and consolidate it all. So by doing this, you get a good solid hedge, and that provides the platform to put the next course of turf on. This is another section of the same hedge. Here we've got stone in situ, so where you've got stone you tend to use stone, because the stone does make a more permanent, better hedge than the turf, and the rabbits can't get into it. This isn't dry stone walling, by the way, because it's called stone facing because there's soil in behind it. So dry stone walling wouldn't have any soil in. A Devon stone faced hedge would now have a hedge replanted along the top, because where the cattle and everything were going through here, they just destroyed the hedge. So we'll replant this with hazel and thorn.
Proper bloody stuff, is it?
Rob, from a conservationist point of view, what makes a good hedge
for you? Well, there's no one good hedge that's really good. I think what you want is a variety of different hedges, because hedges that are tall have different birds and other wildlife than hedges that are short. So a farm has a variety of different structures. That's the great thing.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of wildlife would you expect to find in a really good hedge?
Hedges are so good for is not great rarities, but the common things that occur in our farmland. If you large tracts of England, if you took away the hedges, you wouldn't have really much else left in terms of a wildlife habitat at all. And so those hedges are really important refuges, and they're, particularly farmland birds, a great worry about them declining at the moment. If our hedges decline further, if they're not managed, then we can see even more losses. I mean, song thrushes, for example, you know, red data book species, they breed in hedges, often found in hedges, particularly the thicker, bushier hedges.
Because it's not only birds, it's invertebrates and mammals as well, isn't there? What sort of examples are there of those?
Well, lots. I mean, the hedge brown, for example, is known as the gatekeeper, a typical butterfly of hedges. There's things like around this part of the world, we are in Devon at the moment, we've got the brown hair streak, which lays its eggs on hedges on the new growth of blackthorn.
As you've mentioned, hedgerows of all different ages on a farm are a great advantage. There's nothing more beautiful in May than a big hawthorn hedge covered in May blossom and alongside shorter hedges. There's one species that particularly likes overgrown hedges, isn't there?
Yes, and that's a speciality of this part of the world, and indeed lots of parts of southern England, and that's the dormouse. And recent research has shown that in fact hedges are an important habitat, and probably nearly as important as woodland are, for dormice. And what they're liking is big, thick hedges, something that's at least 3 meters tall, and lots of different species in there. Honeysuckle is a very favoured species, for example. They eat the flowers and they take the nectar and they build their nests out of the bark from honeysuckle. So but hedges that are short, that have been cut regularly, they won't contain dormice. So again, it comes back to this thing of having a variety of different sorts of hedge on the farm or in the landscape to get the best value for wildlife.
Hello and welcome to Cumbria. Today we're at Newby Bridge at the south end of the Lake Windermere, and we're doing the local style of hedge laying, which is a Lancashire Westman style. The hedge we're laying today is a mixed hedge, hawthorn, quickthorn, hazel and hash. And we're laying it on a bank that we call a cop, and we're laying it in a traditional style in a double row of stakes and banking it up at the other side. The most important part of any hedge is the nicking, as we call it locally, or pleaching. And if you do the nicking correctly, it means it grows correctly for the next man who comes along to lay it in 20 years time or whatever, and makes the job a lot easier for him. What you do with the brash is very cosmetic. The local style, we lay it in a double row of stakes with brush to both sides, and to keep a nice square edge, make it sock proof from both sides. And then we pull a little bit of dead wood just in the bottom, just to stop the sheep of poking the noses in and nibbling off the new shoots, and to make it a lot more stock proof. And it also enhances the appearance of the hedge because it looks nice and square and well presented. Staking of the hedge is equally important as anything else. The Lancashire Westman style, we have a double row of stakes staggered alternately at opposite sides of the hedge. So we have stake number 1 there, number 2 here, number 3, number 4. We're looking for a spacing of about 4 foot between them outside, so in effect you have a stake every 2 foot along the hedge. Touch it around, that's it. Having brought it over, we now need to get some of the smaller pieces up the outside of the stakes, because the stakes you just want to be covered with a little bit of light brush, so they're not quite as evident, so you can't quite see them as well. Because at the end of the day we want it to look as natural as possible, and I'm using copy stakes, but sometimes we have to use sawmill stakes, which are square sawn and quite aggressive in appearance, and so by just pulling a little bit of what we call feather, some of the light brush up the outside, and we can just hide them, make them a little bit more presentable.
This hedgerow is pretty typical of what we find in modern agriculture these days. Arable fields both sides of the hedge, no livestock on this farm anymore. And every single year this hedge is trimmed at exactly the same height. It's actually giving up the ghost. It can't survive that kind of cutting regime. And what's happening is gaps are starting to appear. The person on the flail machine comes along every single year and even cuts these isolated bushes to the same height. Another gap, nothing growing here of any interest, it's only nettles. Onto another little bush. This one's minute. Still the flail machine comes over the top of it. In this one small bush here we can actually see the quite sad history of this hedgerow. It's actually been laid before. We can see one of the old pleachers coming down here. It's been cut to the same height ad infinitum for the last 30 years or so, and even the stump down here is starting to go completely rotten. So what are the options for the landowner when faced with an old decrepit hedge like this? Well, one of the first things they could do is actually plant up the gaps. Secondly, they could allow the hedge to sort of incrementally grow each year. There's absolutely no value for anything at this height. Let's have a look at some of the other hedges that you might find on a farm. One of the most typical things that happens to an over-trimmed hedge is the fact that elderberry gets into it. Now, elderberry seems to kill out everything next to it. It absolutely thrives on being cut by a flail. You can see here with these pieces, look at that, that's actually 1 year's growth, and that's way over 1 metre tall. So as soon as elder starts to get into a hedge, it destroys the rest of the hedge. There's only one thing to do with elderberry, and that's grub it out and plant up the gap. This is an interesting hedge because we can see 3 stages of its history. We can see here the old pleachers when it was last laid, and we have it on good authority that this hedge was last laid in 1947. We can see those in the bottom of the hedge. We can see that the growth came up to this height and was trimmed constantly at this height. We can see a sort of shadow there where all the cut nodules of the branches are. Now we can see the more recent history where the landowner has let the hedge grow on up, and we've got some lovely straight, vigorous, frithy kind of growth, which is ideal for the hedge layer. So this hedge is now ready for laying. We've got lots of straight stems, we've got some lovely young growth on top, and this will make a jolly good laid hedge. Not all hedges have to be trimmed down very low. This hedge, which is 20 years old, has been allowed to incrementally grow up over the years. And what a wonderful hedge it is. This is about the maximum height that a hedge trimmer can get to, but what we have here is a wonderful wildlife hedge, perfect for nesting birds. Okay, it's not maybe stock-proof in the bottom, but with arable both sides of it, it doesn't need to be. However, should we need to make this stock-proof, it could be laid because we've got the height already. The hedge has actually got room to breathe. The other great benefit of a hedge this high is should there have been stock the other side, they would be completely sheltered. Also, if you're on a sporting estate, a hedge this high can be used to make the birds rise up and over towards the guns. This hedge is an ancient parish boundary, and it's been left untouched for over 50 years. It's about 15 foot wide, and it forms an absolutely magnificent habitat. Eventually, of course, it may want to go to trees, and before that it may have to be reshaped with a circular saw blade. But at the moment, it's absolutely fantastic. Very final stage of a hedgerow that has received no management at all is something like this. It's actually becoming a row of trees. It's a very difficult decision for a landowner to know what to do with this. It's actually got beyond a stage where you can lay it now, and the only course of action would be to coppice it to ground level, although that is actually going to be quite a radical step in terms of the wildlife in this hedgerow. If you want a line of trees, that's fine, then let it be a line of trees. If you want a hedge, you've got to take some action, intervene and regenerate it from the bottom up.
Here we have a Derbyshire hedge that was cut and laid March last year. Just a year's growth on this now. You can see how it's grown from the very base, from the stools that were left as low down to the ground as we can get them till you force the new growth to come from low down. Not only that, all the pleachers are well alive, and you've got all the new growth coming off the pleachers. Everywhere over it there's been nicked and marked and cut. Any small cuts you make is shoving out new growth, but most importantly it's coming from the base and filling the hedge up, and that is 1 year's growth. Really remarkable. They will all grow up, then they can be trimmed, and you've got a strong hedge forevermore, because from wherever you've laid one you're going to get 4 or 5 grow. And that's what the idea of hedge laying is about, to form new growth from the bottom. It'll be a good hedge for another 30 years, this will. To come back and see a hedge like this after a year, it makes you feel good.
Hedge trimming has undergone many developments in the last 70 years. Once all hedges were trimmed by hand, but then came the post-war years of rapid agricultural mechanisation. Hedge trimmers of all shapes and sizes came on the market, often using reciprocating cutting knives or circular saw blades. More recently, the flail cutter has become the standard machine, though sometimes the results can be brutal. These days, landowners are encouraged to cut hedgerows in rotation to allow the formation of berries on 2- and 3-year-old branches. New machines, such as this one with rotating knives, are being developed to cut the larger growth more cleanly. The south of England style is found mainly in the southeast of the country. It is what is called a double brush style, which means that the branches of each pleacher are placed either side of the stake line, which runs down the centre of the hedge. The double brush allows stock to be kept both sides of the hedge, as the new growth is protected from both sides.
With the south of England style, quite often we use cleft chestnut, because there's a lot of chestnut coppice in Kent and Sussex and Surrey, and yeah, it's very suitable and it seems to last a long time. Also you could use ash or sometimes birch we use. Sharpen it, put it on the knee, and cut back with the bill hook for safety.
The method of binding is also unique to the south of England style and holds the hedge down firmly in place. Like most other styles with bindings, hazel is the preferred material.
I'm opening up with bill hook the top two, pushing the top two binders up to allow the next binder to come underneath these two, and we continue along the hedge exactly the same.
Last of all, the brush is trimmed and the hedge checked for straightness and strength. The South of England Society holds many training days for its members and, as with other regional styles, organises numerous competitions. As this archive film shows, winning the national championships has always been the dream of every hedge layer.
Hedge-laying enthusiasts made a good start in 1956 by demonstrating their proficiency in the second national hedge-laying contest at Stamford, Lincolnshire. The contest was organised to encourage the preservation of thorned hedges and the craftsmanship required to lay them. All entrants were required to have won a first or second prize in previous competitions. Even though there are several styles of hedge-laying in this country, no local style was stipulated. Only that the contestant laid the hedge diagonally on the ground line and split low enough to cause new growth to spring from the soil level. All hedges had to be laid right-handed with the brush to one side. The working time was from 9 o'clock to 2:15, during which 11 yards of hedge should have been laid. The end of the day drew near and the judges' decisions were announced. Mr. William Neal, already winner of 20 hedging prizes, was acclaimed the champion hedger in the senior class, and Mr. Gerald Hawkins was acclaimed the junior champion. In addition, each participant was presented with a silver medal, which was well earned. As one judge stated in describing the juniors' work, it's very difficult to criticize any of them. Every boy thoroughly deserves a medal. The awarding of the prizes signaled the close of a cold but enjoyable event. The participants tidied up their area, packed their tools, and headed for home. Those who were not chosen Britain's best hedger will no doubt strive to improve their skill in readiness for future events.
Today, competitions still provide lots of friendly rivalry and a great day out for hedge layer and spectator alike.
Number 7. Well, it's 9:30 in the morning and we're at the Oxfordshire Championships today, and the starter rocket has just been fired away down there to start the day. I'm going to be doing the Midland style today, and we each get 10 yards. First thing in the morning we draw the lots out of a hat. I've got number 7 today, which is not a bad bit. It's mainly hawthorn, there's bits of dogwood and all sorts in there, but it's not too bad. Of course, you never know what you're going to get at the start of a competition. You might have gaps, you might have bramble, but you just hope for the luck of the draw. So today we're doing the Midland style, and we actually get supplied all our raw material. These are the stakes, all hazel, about 5'6", 6 foot tall. We get 20 of those. We got 10 yards and we get given 20 of those. And also we're supplied with the hazel bindings, or heatherings as they're called. These are about 10, 12 feet long. Absolutely ideal. Usually is hazel. So the first thing we do this morning, faced with the start of the hedge, we've got to clear out the bottom.
How long and when you started? Because I used to have my dad the binders when I was about 10 or 11 for Saturday, you know, and it just goes on from there.
The basic techniques used for pleaching a hedge down are common to all styles, even though every stem in a hedge is unique, and each may cause the hedge layer very different problems.
Well, we're about halfway through now. So when we pleach one down, the first thing you have to do is clear the top. It's absolutely no good cutting away at the bottom and then doing what I'm doing now. It'll come off at the bottom. So having done that, get into pleach one over with the axe. People often ask how far to start the pleach. And I always think if you take the diameter of the stem, say in this case it's 3 inches, start about 3 to 4 times that high. So it's about 3 inches wide, start about 9, 10 inches high. Good confident first couple of blows. We'll pull, see if anything's happening. It's actually a case of thinning the stem, I always like to think. Got a bit of a crack then, which is good. So as I open it up with my left hand, get the axe in, and then cut lower every time I'm thinning the stem. Lever it with the axe. If I try and pull it before it's thin enough, it will kick up. If I cut it too thin, it will just run down the stem. That's the crucial bit. And of course the judges are looking for the quality of the cutting. And the last few cuts are way down at the bottom, thinning there. It's worth checking if you need to put another stake in at this time. It's very easy to forget to put the stakes in and suddenly find your way back here.
We've got a slight problem here. As this has grown quite badly, all the dead wood is in the front, where we'd normally like to cut and lay. But due to the bad front of the stump, we're going to try and endeavour to lay it on the root, which is going down into the ground there. And quite often it's nice and fleshy down there, whereas just here you can see it's old and the damp and the water's got in it. So hopefully that root there will endeavour us to keep it on and keep a nice live pleacher. We're taking the earth away in front of it because it will create a bridge for the layer to drop on. So what I'm trying to do at the moment is to split one root from the other. As you can see, we've just about achieved it. Back off its normal way. We've got it free at the top. Right, as you can see, we've split it away from the old dead root in front of it. We've now cut it down into the ground, which is called root laying. We took the soil away in the front of it to enable it to go as low as we possibly can do. And now we treat it in a normal way. Have a nice clean cut on the front. Take the heel off. Now we like to think, in the fullness of time, we'll have all new growth growing from that little old root down there. Here we had a slight problem. This piece was growing quite nice and straight in the hedge, but at the base it wanted to grow out towards the front of the hedge. So as I was a little bit short of timber just through here, I decided to cut it on the side and have taken it through the hedge, and it's given me a nice build up the front of the Midland style bullock fence.
This miniature hedge is the Midland style. It is a stock-proof bullock hedge for Midland, for the cattle, but it's just an hedgerow in miniature to show the general public that I'm sure, I don't know if this is the only one, a collection of hedgerows that goes on show for the National and shows the general public in one area 8 different styles of hedgerow. Take the best one up over the top, down behind, and then cut the
Right, we finished cutting and laying now we put the binders on. We've got a reasonably good stake line down the front of the hedge. I've knocked them all in and they're all reasonably tight. First of all, I get one in front and one behind. So now I've got 2 to run with for a start. So we roll 2 together. And then we pick up another binder. And we roll 2 again. Try and keep them nice and even when you're rolling them. You know if it's tight. Right, so in front of that stake, behind the next one. So in front of that stake, behind the next one. And that's our start. So we're now left with 2 binders. The secret of good binding is keeping the right hand down and the left hand up, like so. Left hand up, right hand down. This will create quite a lot of pressure at the start of putting your binders on. And what we try and do is to go down this seam all the way through the binder. Pull them out and then it'll go all the way down the seam. Roll it out to a finish. And remembering what we did on the first binder, in front of that stake, behind that one. So in front of the stake, behind the next one. Tap them down to suit.
The next step, having got the binders on, is to level them all up. Stand well back. What do you reckon? Oh, going uphill.
Having put your binders on and still kept a reasonably fine and straight stake line, we'll take the tops off the stake. The way I do it is put an old stake down behind it, cut downhill, cut uphill, cut downhill, cut uphill. And that's how we try and do it.
There's 3 minutes left, just time to come around the back and find out what you haven't done. So Clive, describe to us what is actually a typical Midlands hedge.
Midland hedge is a nice stock proof upright hedge, strong, well built, good front, quite a wide back, and which will help to keep the bullocks in during the summer months.
And what you actually mean by that is that there are two sides, isn't there? The stock would have been back there.
Correct. The stock is at the back of the fence here, and this brush will stop them nibbling away at the new shoots which are growing on this side of the fence. Yep.
So I think I'm right in saying that they would have laid this hedge as part of a crop rotation, and this side would have gone into arable this year, so there's no stock eating off the new growth.
That's correct, yes, because this is where we think all our new shoots are going to come from. All around this, our new baby shoots will come through this year, and by the time next year comes, they will be approximately about that high.
Clive, when we talk about Midland hedge, we talk about it being laid off. Can you just describe what that is?
Yes, what we're trying to do is that the thorn, the piece we're cutting is there, and we're trying to do 8 to 9 inches, just laid it off enough. This will give us an A-shaped hedge when they come to trimming. The trimmer will come down here in years to come, and we'll trim down there, and it will trim down the back on the same angle like that, and we'll get a nice A-shaped hedge.
So another way of perhaps explaining that is that if that was the stem there, to have laid it straight along the hedge, that it would have gone down there.
Yeah.
But the hedge layer has laid it off.
Just off enough.
Way.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah.
That is that 9 or 10 inches.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's what we want. Yeah.
Okay, perhaps we should go around the back of the hedge now and have a look at that. Perfect place for nesting birds as well.
Most certainly. Yes. Your wildlife will love it in there. It most certainly will do. Yeah. Good and nice and warm.
Murray, approximately how much hedging do you produce every year?
We produce enough plants to grow about 40 kilometres of mixed or true hawthorn hedging.
So that's quite a large amount of hedging. Would it be true to say that more hedging is being planted now than being taken out?
Oh, substantially. Over the last 10-15 years, the amount of hedging going in has increased dramatically. Although mixed hedges are becoming more popular for conservation reasons, it is still a good idea to look at the existing hedges in your own area when it comes to the choice of species. For a typical mixed hedge, we recommend that a minimum of 60% of the plants should be hawthorn, which forms the basis of a good, strong hedge. Then add in 10% hazel and 10% blackthorn, with an additional 5% each of any of the following according to your own soil type: field maple, common dogwood, purging buckthorn, dog rose, guelder rose, spindle, or wild crabapple. It is important to spread these lesser species throughout the hedge and not to clump them together, as this could cause future management problems, particularly for the hedge layer.
This is a decent showing how a Derbyshire hedge should be. Nice and high, at least 3'6", 3'9" if you can. All the wood from the floor right up to the top of the stakes, and making a strong fence flat along the top, and a good wide brash. This is one of the most important things about a Derbyshire hedge, is a good wide brash to keep cattle off that side and protect all the new growth from lambs, sheep and other animals from that side. But you must build it nice and straight up the front. It's got to be reasonably straight. You must have laid away just enough for a third of the growth to come up the front, and the other growth will go up through the hedge and hold the hedge tight and firm for many, many years. Everywhere it is cut, you're going to get new growth. Small places like these, it will all shove up new growth coming up, and they fill into the hedge as well as the ones that are coming from the floor. Importantly is get your new growth to come from the stool or stubbins at the base. That is why we cut these nice and thin, so there's only about 1/10 of the sap going up this to keep this alive. The other 90% of the sap is going to feed the new growth that comes up from there. All these, every place at the stool or stubbins as they're called, will shove up new growth, and in 2 years' time it will be up to there. Then the hedge can be trimmed. Derbyshire style is with thick sawn stakes to make your hedge stronger, so you can weave your hedge in front, in front and behind, and tightens all your hedge up, and in a good length. You should be able to shake it and the whole lot goes right the way down. It means the hedge is tight and these won't drop down. The lighter they are, without being woven around the stakes, tend to make your hedge drop. All hedges will fall down, so you want to keep them as tight as you possibly can to feed this new growth and hold the new growth into place for many, many years. We've come back to show you how well it has grown from the bottom and all over the hedge, everywhere where it has been cut and nicked and grown. Most of all, we've come to show the growth from the bottom. From where there have been one layered, you've now got 5 or 6 growing from the bottom, which will gradually fill up through the hedge and fill up the hedge to make it a stock-proof fence. Not only from the bottom do you want growth, you must have growth all over the hedge so that when it's trimmed, it's thick, better for birds and everything else. But this does prove how well they can grow in a short space of time. All right from the bottom, this is the most important thing, but also all over the hedge as well. But all new growth, and it'll gradually thicken up and make a super hedge.
Since the war, somewhere in the region of 200,000 miles of hedgerows have been lost. That's a colossal amount of hedgerow lost, and think about all the species that will have lost with those hedgerows. Nowadays, hedgerow removal is illegal. Since 1997, hedgerow regulations have meant that all hedgerows on farms are protected, and no hedges can be removed without prior permission from the local planning authority. And they will make a value judgment on any hedgerow that's requested removal by looking at the wildlife value, the historical value, the public amenity and landscape values. And they will come, they'll look at the hedge and they will then assess it and either give you permission or not give you permission, depending on what the findings are. And hedgerows are a crucial part of that biological diversity. The numbers of species of plants, animals, birds, etc. involved in hedgerows is phenomenal, thousands. And it's crucially important that we look after this really quite valuable habitat and we look to conserve it and improve it for future generations.
The Yorkshire style is unique in that it uses a top rail to hold the hedge in place. The hedge is cut very narrow, allowing lots of light for good regrowth. This style has a number of regional variations which have developed over the centuries to suit the landscape and the farming methods.
Right, I'm just going to split this one with this axe, and I want it split into the ground. I like it split into the ground because we've made 2 nice plants. Now if you had a lot of plants, like you have in the Midlands, you can make a new crop of poles that you can lay in, but quite often I have to deal with old layers, and that's all that's left of the hedge. So we're making a nice layer here that's going to make a new plant from the stock and a new plant from the layer. And keep it in line. Okay, you can see, just tied it up with an axe so it's nice and neat. Very important. The ground. We're making, in effect, 2 plants. One that's the layer and one that's the stock. Now, I'll chain this off because I can't get a decent swinging with the axe. Now it's nice and neat. So we've made 1 plant here. That'll make brand new regrowth from the cuts here. When I've laid this piece neatly in, you get a lot of regrowth there. You can see on the regrowth here, we're making in effect a new plant. Now, to be a York's hedge, it's very narrow. It's cut for regrowth. Okay, what I'm doing is trimming off most of the side off here. You're left with in effect a pole. Now I'm going to welt this into the ground. I might add flat side for cutting, curved side for all the rammel and trimming up. Okay, nicely into the ground, making 2 plants. Okay, that's nice. It's all trimmed up, ready to go. A little bit of a stump on there. Okay, very important, keeping it narrow. Sticking it round the stakes, in effect what you might call weaving. And I usually straddle it so it starts to give me a gauge in that I don't make it too far, too wide rather. In that if I couldn't straddle it, we're either getting too broad or too high. Okay. Nice cleft stake here, personal preference. The finished piece of work is about 3 foot high. You can see from the work here, the hedge is cut very narrow. Now, there's a little bit of green on it, that's the time of year. Okay, it fills the top nicely, makes a nice finish. Now we come to the bigger, thicker stuff here. Lots of white on it. I like these close to the ground. You can see these are all being welted into the ground. It's a bit damp, so it's picking the soil, picking the dust and stuff up, but I want them all on nice and tight. The big ones, sometimes you cut them out and there's a space here, so we dropped them in. Put a rail here, because one day this is all going to go up. The rail's going to hold it all together. Okay, you might not want to put a fence up here, and in a couple of years' time you can put some sheep in there. Difficult for them to climb through, the sheep. They'll be this high with thick thorn, and they'll all come from your regrowth, especially ones like this. What's that? 5 or 6 inches across. The amount of growth on that, it's the same on the other side. So we're left with a nice broad hedge that's very easy to manage.
My name is Tom Evans. I'm chairman of the Bilth Wells Ploughing and Hedgelaying Society. We hold a match every year somewhere in the area. It is becoming very difficult to get a site with both the ploughing and the hedging, because there's less ploughing being done all the time, because farmers in the hills are no longer ploughing for corn or swedes. So we're very, very lucky here today to have a couple of very good fields and a hedge handy to do, and fencing as well. So we're very lucky with the site. On the hedge laying side, we have 3 styles: the Breckenshire style, the Radnorshire style and the Montgomeryshire style.
All the Welsh border styles are based on the same principle of a good, thick, dense hedge. There's a lot of dead wood put in the hedge, which is there to protect the pleachers, the live wood. The dead wood is put on the outside and the live wood on the inside. With a lot of sheep in Wales, they need to be there to stop the sheep eating the hedge. And this is the same principle, but there's slight variations in the styles from Breckenshire, Radnorshire to Montgomeryshire. This hedge here is Radnorshire style, or crop and pleach as we know it. It's crop and pleach. These cags here are live and they're cut off at the top of the hedge. The dead wood is put on the outside of the pleachers to protect the pleachers from the livestock. And this hedge is the same both sides, and it's wider on the bottom than it is on the top. And it's very stock effective, and sheep and other can't get at the pleachers to eat them. This here is the Montgomery style, very similar to the Radnorshire style, only they lay their dead wood all the way along the one side first and bring their live wood in from the other side over top of it and weave it in round the stakes. This is the Breckenshire stake and pleach. This hedge, the competitor has made a bank in the start, ditched it up. He lays his hedge then just off the side of the bank. The idea of the bank is there were hollows in the ditch to make it nice and level and straight, so he's got a good line to follow. He then lays his hedge with the pleachers all at the same angle, running up through the hedge, and all the wood should run parallel with each other. So if it's pleached down by here, it runs right up through and comes up underneath the heathering through here. And it's on the same angle and pitch all the way through. And finished off with the binders on the top to tie it all down. And it should be the same height from the bottom of the ditch to the top of the hedge all the way through from start to finish. One of the reasons why we like to have a nice slope on the stakes is when we're bringing the wood down and they've got a nice fork like this one has on it. If it's too upright, it gets trapped on the stake. But there, once you slope your stakes, it allows it to go down as low as you want to. When it's upright, it traps it there, and you can't get the wood down at the right angle.
20, 30 years ago, nothing was wasted when we hedged. Today they're fenced up, but then all the hedges were unfenced, and when you laid a hedge there would be a loads of spare wood, as we have out of here, and this stuff would be put into what we call tushes. It would be a gambo load. The old gambos in those days, they very often either chuck it on the gambo or make up a tush, put a chain around it and tow it to another hedge, and they all had to be glatted, what we call glatted, and that was stuffing this stuff in and making an artificial hedge. And it was the most, for me as a young fellow, I did a lot of it then, 30, 40 years ago, and it was a horrible job. I didn't like it at all. I loved hedging, I hated glatting because everything was so awkward.
DEFRA are currently running two schemes that help landowners manage hedgerows: the Countryside Stewardship Scheme and the Environmentally Sensitive Area Scheme. Increasingly, any rural skills now cost more money than they used to. Labour's much more expensive than it used to, particularly on farm in rural areas with skills that are very much in short supply. Both schemes offer payments to farmers for managing hedgerows. That includes laying hedges, coppicing hedges, even planting new hedges, and of course the protective fencing that's so important to make sure that the hedgerow management survives. Ideally, we want to be managing every hedgerow on the farm. Some of that management may well be no intervention, you know, allowing the hedge to grow up, perhaps with a view to laying it in the future. Clearly, many hedgerows on farms, particularly after a period of, if you like, no hedge laying over the last 20, 30 years, it's important to bring back those hedgerows into management as soon as possible. But we don't want to do every hedge, you know, in the first few years of a 10-year agreement. We want to make sure that we do it slowly, we do it gradually, and of course we do it well, so that we create a diversity on the farm that's got some hedges that are newly laid, some hedges that have been laid for a while, some hedges that have, you know, awaiting laying, so that what we've got is we've got a whole heap of diversity on the farm that's good for all different sorts of wildlife. Let's not forget as well the importance of the hedge bottoms and the margins alongside the hedges. Often the hedges, together with the rough strip at the bottom of the hedge, can on some farms be the only semi-natural habitat available on a farm, particularly on an intensive arable holding. And the current schemes pretty well all offer payments to manage that in an appropriate way as well. It can be, you know, a grass strip that's simply left ungrazed, or it can be an area that's perhaps cultivated and sown with species-rich wildflower seeds and something like that. What we're looking to try and achieve is we're trying to marry sound land management, and with that goes all the habitat management as well, together with commercial modern agriculture. Without the two together, we're lost. We've got to make sure that we have good quality food production, and that must be the fundamental aim of all farmers and rural communities, but also manage and maintain the environment in a sustainable and economic way.
Well, another day, another competition, and yet another style. This is the North Somerset style. We're about 20 miles south of Bristol, and this is the style they do down here. It's a very, very localised style. I suppose it's a cross really between the Devon style up on the bank and the Lancashire and Westmoreland style. As soon as you get down in the West Country, you start to get really mixed hedges. Absolutely everything in this: hazel, blackthorn, hawthorn, dogwood spindle, the lot, including rocks, I might add. Anyway, I've just finished my bit. It's time for the judging. I think we should go and talk to somebody that really knows what they're talking about when it comes to this style. I'm with Frank Ware now, who's the chairman of the Rington and Burrington Society. Hello, Frank.
Hello, Nigel.
Frank, you're chairman. How long have you been chairman of the society?
Since 1975. 1975.
1975. And this society has been going an awful long time, hasn't it?
It's 171 years. Now it started in 1832.
Absolutely amazing, isn't it? Yeah. It's a lovely little style, I think. Tell us a little bit about it, Frank. How high and how wide do you aim to get it?
Today we've been making the hedge a yard high and 2 foot wide.
So how wide apart are these stakes going in?
Those stakes we put about 3 foot apart.
Yeah.
One there, alternate them, about 3 foot apart. We make our hedge 3 foot high, 2 foot wide generally. It's all according to how much we have in the hedge.
Yeah.
The other hedge we've been making today has been 18 inches long after the road there.
Yeah.
We like clean cutting.
Yeah.
Clean the hills, cut back up. I like to see the hedge cleared out nice and clean for the new growth to come up from the bottom, and also for everything. And I do like to see, this is what we call a sheep fence.
Yep.
So the sheep can't get through, and you've got good fence in the bottom. If you want a cattle fence, you just put a row of barbed wire here, and then you've got a good stock-proof fence, also a good windbreak.
So you find a lot of people want to take it up around here?
We found now, we've had 8 this time teaching. We generally have it up to a 12. We've run 6 classes on Wednesdays, and followed by the competition on the 7th Wednesday. And I got right now 4 of us to help train the people. And I'm just what you call the chain of dog's body.
You're the boss.
No, I'm the boss. There's no bosses.
Two of the most important people of the day here, and the first question I've got to ask them is, do you take bribes?
Certainly not.
Oh, fine. Okay, we've got that out. We've got that out of the way. Yeah. No, joking aside, what are you looking for when you judge this North Somerset style?
We're looking for the firmness of the hedge when it's completed, how tight the stakes are in, how straight the splashers that they've laid down are all running straight up through the hedge.
Right. Now the splashers, I think you're referring to the actual cuts which north of here they call pleachers, is that right? You call them splashers? Okay, that's fine, yeah. So the quality of the cutting, yeah.
Yeah. How well it's all been finished off at the end.
Yeah.
The visual appearance of it is another, and then we always carry a thumbstick just to see how wide the hedge is.
Yeah.
And then we put it down, and we've got a mark on our thumbsticks just to see how high the hedge is. So we check that on every hedge to make sure they've worked to the size of the hedge and worked to the width of the hedge.
They're given the height and the width before they start.
Yes, yes. It looks like you've got a difficult job today.
We've had a very difficult job.
Well, we won't hold you up. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
15.
Frank, we better go down the beer tent.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes, come.
The National Hedgelaying Society was formed in 1978. This was to follow up the skills and traditional way of laying hedges. We have members all around the country, many of whom are able to do contract work for us. The National Society run training courses, and we have many members who will take these courses. And also, obviously, there's various places around the country where these take place quite regularly. But it's a thing with hedge laying, you can keep learning. There's always something different. Every stump or every stall that you come to is different than the one before, and it needs attacking or cutting in a different position, a different angle or whatever. It's always a great challenge, and you can keep learning. You never finish learning.
There has been an enormous increase in interest in our hedgerows, as we have come to realise their importance in our countryside. In order to save them for future generations, we need to think about how we look after them. A balance needs to be struck between demands of modern farming and the benefits to wildlife through sympathetic management. Hedge laying is an ancient art practiced by skilled craftsmen and women who learnt their skills through those that came before them. We in turn need to encourage young people to take up the craft, for without its practitioners, a craft will fade away. We are but temporary custodians of our countryside, so let us pass on to our children an environment we can be proud of.